This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And before we go any further, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed this podcast, you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. We were in another week of our series, Listening to Jesus, and this week, Pastor Scott, you talked about silence and solitude and how that is what is necessary for us to be able to hear God speak to us. Yeah. However, you shared that it's really a vulnerable state and that sometimes we're perhaps afraid of it. Why do you think it is that we might fear it, and how can we kind of like get over that hurdle of being afraid of it and just making it happen?
Because it's so rare, like we don't know what to do with it. And then the other side of that, not just that it's rare and so we haven't experienced it maybe the way that people used to experience it. Like you used to like live in a home where there wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on.
Right.
You didn't have neighbors close by. If you heard anything, it was just nature. Like, and now like you don't get that. So it's like to be silent and find silence is rare. Like I even noticed last night, like I told everyone on Sunday, my back porch is my place. And I spent like an hour and a half out there last night. And I just realized that my air conditioning unit sits right beside there. And it never stops. And so even that, like it wasn't completely as silent as I would wanted it to be. So it's very hard to find. And then the other side of it, why I think it's so, why we might be afraid of it is I think all of us are far more broken than what we would ever begin to want to believe. Yeah. And when you sit there in the silence, stuff starts like to boil up to the surface that like you use social media and music and productivity and work and your kids' schedules and all that to kind of suppress all of that. Right. The way you just go. And when you sit silently, some of that stuff finally makes its way to the surface and it wants to be dealt with. And then we're kind of reminded of like, oh, that's why I keep the pace that I keep, the way I don't ever have to deal with what happened to me when I was 12 years old. Or I don't ever have to deal with how I truly feel about myself when it's just me sitting there and I'm thinking and praying and it's just my thoughts like, I don't ever have to deal with that. I don't have to deal with the insecurity. I don't have to deal with the anxiety if I just keep on going. And so I think our levels of brokenness that we have not yet really understood or sought to be healed. Yeah. Because you have to be a very healed and whole person to be comfortable in silence and solitude. And because that would be almost remarkable to find someone that is that healed and whole. It's a little scary for a lot of people. Yeah. But the key to actually getting healed and whole is to spend quiet time alone with the Lord and allow Him to bring those things up to the surface that may even be uncomfortable, and then allow Him to help heal you and work through those things in those moments. And so if you ever want to get healed and whole to be comfortable in silence, you have to go through the silence when it's not real comfortable for God to do that work. Yeah. And so I think that it's very rare, and I think that we're far more broken than what we like to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think similarly, I feel like it's almost the same reason why a lot of people struggle with going to counseling initially is because it forces those things that you've buried down deep below all of that and that you keep hidden in the chaos of whatever that have to come up, that have to be dealt with. But I think that it's true. Like once you do that and you experience what you receive from it, then it makes it easier to do it again because you realize, oh, this is why it's necessary. This is why I needed to do this, because once you start to experience that, then you realize the benefit from that. And I think that's the same reason why, like, a lot of times, you know, we talked about scripture reading, but I think it's the same thing. Like with scripture reading, a lot of people haven't experienced the benefits from it
Right.
So they don't understand the necessity for it
Yes.
because they haven't experienced that. And so I think it's true with silence and solitude as well. Now, you also shared about how a lot of times the loudest thing is what gets through, but that's not what's always important.
Yes.
And how we have to quiet our lives. But how do we discern what's really most important and what to listen to?
Yeah. So, again, it's the scriptures are going to be the most important thing, and honestly, the way that God speaks to us. And so it's taking everything that we've talked about for the first 3 weeks and putting it all together. So it's the first week, you have to change your rhythm to get less busy, so the way you choose the best thing.
Yeah.
And then you see the supremacy of the scriptures in your life as authoritative. And then you find silence and solitude, whereas you read the scriptures and invite God to speak to you in those moments. And that's like what God has to say will always be the most important thing. And, it bothers me greatly that, like, so we have something that's going on in our world right now where there's been this fighting between Israel and Iran. The United States sends bombings over the weekend. And immediately, anytime that there's anything dealing with Israel in the Middle East, people want to go to the Bible. And unfortunately, they're always going and trying to find what other people have to say about it. And they're going out to all these like social media theologians and all this that are leading them astray and saying these wildly outlandish things that are only making them more anxious when that's never been the aims of the scriptures in the first place. And so we value other people's voices so much more, and they're the loudest for sure. Like social media is the loudest voice right now. Whatever gets the most clicks, whatever gets the most shares, and the loudest person may not even be true.
Right.
It may not even have anything valid like to say, but they're just the one that's getting retweeted the most or the one that's getting shared the most. And so you have to be able to cut through all of that with the truth of God's scriptures, and then understanding the more that you sit in silence and listen for the still small voice of God, the more that you'll come to understand what that voice sounds like and how that voice feels and how it leads and guides, and that's how it cuts through.
Yeah.
There's so much right now, like the loudest voice is very rarely the most important voice in our lives. Like, I don't think that we even fully understand like how the role that music plays in our life. We listen to music over, and do we know what these songs are saying and how they're actually speaking really deeply into our lives, whether we admit it or not. And so music can be really loud, but what is the message behind it? There's just a lot of things that are so loud in our life. And the thing that we need the most is the thing that we tend to neglect the most. And so life is very loud, and the only way that we'll ever hear God's voice is for us to get quiet.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying this is like a total overhaul, like stop doing what you're doing. It's like you just have to make some space.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get away from having to be productive in life.
Right.
Jesus was a very productive person. He touched many people's lives, was teaching all over the place, was going from place to place. He just made sure that in the middle of his productivity that he made time to spend with God. That's all it is. Like, we're not talking about major shifts, really, unless your life is just totally out of whack. It's just like last night, I went out to sit on the back deck. I'm out there for a while. I just took like 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the front end of that. Before I got on my phone to watch, I like to watch YouTube. Before I watched YouTube, I remember I had my phone in my hand, and then what I had just talked about Sunday morning kind of came back to mind, and I went, all right, I put the phone down. I'm going to just sit here. God, here's a couple things on my heart. Do you have anything to say to me? And we just sat there for 5-10 minutes, just waiting, listening for the voice of God, spending time, knowing His presence was there with me in the midst of that. And then I went on and watched the YouTube video that I planned on watching. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
I'm not talking about
So-
going and being a monk.
Right. Like, so within that, like something that my husband doesn't understand about me that he's starting to realize more often is when I am doing simple household chores, like if I'm upstairs putting laundry away or folding laundry, doing that, and nobody else is up there with me, I like to just do it in the silence, because there's something about like the task that I'm doing that's repetitive and simple that like keeps my mind off other stuff. So in those moments, I'm able to create silence,
Yeah.
and like I don't play music while I'm doing it. I don't do any of that stuff. And he came up, it was it was before we went to Ecuador. He came up and he grabbed my phone and he turned on music. He goes, "There you go. Now you can listen to some music while you do this." And I go, "Actually, I didn't want to listen to music." I said, I was enjoying the silence. And he goes, "Oh, I forgot that about you." And like he turned it back off and went back downstairs. But it's like in those moments, so like I'll say, as a mom, as a dad, as whatever, like there are things you gotta do, but like there are moments that you can create that. And obviously, like there's always like, unless you really get out in nature, you're going to typically have white noise stuff happening. But even with that, I would say like it's still a much more silent space than if you turn on the radio or the music while you're doing this stuff. And I know a lot of people like, they're like, "Well, I'm more productive if I'm listening to something while I'm cleaning or doing that." But like that's one way for me that I allow those spaces to be silent.
And just like everything else, it's personal. It's personal. Like
exactly.
For like when I'm cleaning or doing something, I have to. I'm watching TV.
Yes.
That's how I do laundry. I watch TV.
Yeah.
But like, there's like you're not always going to be able to take like a spiritual retreat where it's like I remember when I was finishing up my sabbatical the weekend before I came back to work. I told Megan, I said, I just want to go out, and I'm not like a woods person at all. Like I was like, I'm just going to go out and walk in the park for as long as I need to, and just kind of get refocused on work and on the Lord and all that. Like you're not always going to be able to do that. I'm not saying in our current modern context that you can just turn yourself into, your home into a monastery. It's just it's probably not possible. Maybe once you're retired, like you can do more of that. But like we're not saying that. You just have to like let's make sure that we're getting a couple times a week where we're just getting a couple moments of silence and solitude, and then watch how that can build over your life. Like, maybe once a year you take a silent retreat or something where you go and there's places that you can go and stay for like a day or 2 days, 3 days where no one talks. Like you're just in silence.
Where you may not have access to all that
other
stuff. But
you can do stuff like that. But I'm not saying to make these gigantic, like I'm throwing the TV out of the house. I mean, if the Lord tells you to do it, then do it. I'm just saying, how about before you turn the TV on, you find a closet in your home that you could go sit in for 5 minutes and just ask God if He has anything to say to you whatsoever, where you can quiet your heart and your mind, tell Him what's on your heart, give Him time to respond, and then come out and watch your Netflix show. Like that's all we're saying. Like small, minor adjustments to your schedule, to the loudness and level of your life will make drastic differences.
Yeah.
But I don't think most of us notice it. Like I've noticed one of my best times too. Like when I go to bed at night, I always like to watch TV. But there's a moment after I turn the TV off that I'm laying there in between the TV going off and actually falling asleep, where again, I'm going, God, here's some stuff that as soon as it gets silent, these things come to mind.
Yeah.
Here's some stuff, God, before I go to sleep. Do you have anything to say? Any thoughts pop in, any feelings pop in, like just anything, God, that you want to say. And so it's just another moment. It's not, I'm not spending an hour before bed. I'm just giving God a couple of moments going, hey, if you have anything, I am listening right now.
Yeah.
Start there and then see where it takes you. Because I'm still fairly early on, I feel like, even though I've been following the Lord for like 15 years, I feel like I'm very early on in learning the spiritual discipline sort of life that I've been getting a hold of a lot over the last year or so, and so like I'm still learning it, and I know it just keeps growing, and just my understanding of the spiritual disciplines, my understanding of giving myself grace understanding my schedule and pace, understanding my family's needs, and understanding how I can connect with God. And it doesn't have to look just like what everybody else's looks
Right.
like. I can do what it is that feeds my soul and keeps me connected to God, even if that's not what everyone else does
Right.
all the time. And maybe sometimes it looks like other people's and sometimes it doesn't. And it's just,
Right.
the more that I've come to understand the spiritual disciplines, there's a reason why they always tell us growing up of their importance. And it really is the thing that makes the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So you gave us like these 5 S's within that, like how to do it, that you need a space, you need to schedule it, you need seclusion within that. But you also made sure to remind us that like it's different. Seclusion doesn't necessarily mean isolation, complete isolation for good. Like, or if you're an introvert and don't like being around people, that's not what we're talking about. So, and then you said silence and then sticking with it. So you kind of shared a little bit about how often we need to do these kind of things in that. But I would say, like, you shared all these different stories about Jesus and him doing it. So I think within that, you kind of explained a little bit of this next question that I want to ask is when? Like, when do we really need to dial in and make sure that we're doing this? Are there moments in life that we need to make sure we are making space for this?
Yeah, if you're making major life choices, you should be having more than normal prayer and listening time. More than normal. If you're thinking about changing jobs, you're thinking about making a big financial purchase that's going to saddle your family with a certain amount of debt for a long period of time. You're thinking about moving to a new town. You're thinking about moving to a new church. You're thinking about pursuing a new field of work. You're thinking about whether to go back to school. Not like if you're making significant, you're thinking about who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. If you're making significant life-altering decisions, your silence and solitude and prayer and listening time needs to go up significantly. If you're kind of in I'm going through life right now and some of those bigger decisions are behind me and I'm just living right now, like I'm not saying that you're going to find 30 minutes of silence every single day. I think that there's some pastors, Christians, and seminary professors that would love for me to tell you all that if you don't wake up every single morning, it's like I've just seen how that heavy-handed, like if you've got the freedom and the discipline to do it, then do it. I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying I've seen how the heavy-handedness of people's expectations has actually dampened my ability to connect with God. And the more free that I feel in it, the more that I actually choose to connect with God rather than feel obligated to connect with God. And so I would say, like, how or when is really up to you.
Yeah.
It's like, so when I'm in a normal work week, I start my day here at the church with my quiet time. And when I'm not, I might find time in the evening for, out on the back deck or whatever. Like, it never has to look the same as far as I'm concerned, as long as I am consistently connecting with God. And so, if you're making major life choices, you need to really up your prayer time. This is why so many people make choices that affect their family just on a whim, and then they wonder why it doesn't go well. And I'm like, well, I mean, you kind of left the most important person out of the process.
Yeah.
You don't just because another town calls and they have a job for you that pays more than what your current one does, doesn't mean that that's where your family is supposed to be planted.
Right.
I wish more Christians understood that, like, every time that just because something looks better doesn't mean that it's actually what God has for you. Right? Like I know a bunch of pastors that if they were at a church of 100 people and a church of 200 called, they would immediately be like, yes, that's the right move to make. And it goes, well, you don't know that. What if God wants you planted right there to pastor 100 people? What if that's the best place for your kids to be raised around positive, godly influences and with consistency rather than moving to a new church every 3 years?
Yeah.
Like every time that something looks like it's up and to the right, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always God. And so, like, you have to really include him in these, like, life-altering decisions. And so the win of it is like when you schedule it.
Yeah.
And in those major life moments, it's got to increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think that is probably good for this, with some good practical steps for you to take within seeking solitude and silence to hear from God. But we'll be back here again next week with another extra point and some more practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.